start. I'll give you a little cue. Give you a cue. Anytime.
Today is Thursday, September 24th, 1992. We're at the Holocaust Oral History Project. My name is Mike Askanazer. With me is Emily Rosenberg, who will be the second interviewer, and we're interviewing Professor Miklos this morning. And this is the second portion of our interview. The first portion was done approximately 6 weeks ago, August 12th, 1992. Miklos, where we left off last time, we were discussing the work you were doing in Miklos' lab, and could you pick up there, describe the lab and the work?
Well, it was much more than just a lab, you know. It was a whole framework, you know, of carrying out atrocious medical experiments, you know. Lab is always to take the results and to analyze them, right? But it was much more to them. And then to prepare certain skeletons and certain studies for the research of Jewish Institute, which was residing in Frankfurt in the Third Reich, which was nothing but an institute to take specimen, prepare skeletons to prove how degenerate the Jewish race is, you know, anthropologically speaking. So it was a very complex things for which Mengele had, and then there were of course experiments carried out, you know, for the benefit of the German Air Force. I mean, how do people react when they are up, you know, 100,000 or 1,200,000, 120,000 feet, right? You can make the air rare to such an extent, right? And how to freeze in people, I mean, in sub-zero temperature waters, you know, like in the sea for the German submarines. And many similar things, you know, but for this they use not only Jews, they use Russian POWs too, Polish POWs. And the hell with international law, you know. Do you think that international law would embarrass the Nazis? When they said, you know, when the Russians protested, you know, or anything, they said, well, Russia didn't sign the Geneva Convention. I mean, Soviet Union. Well, Poland happened to sign it, right? And he didn't have the Polish POWs either. Only the difference was that their POWs, or any POWs, got into concentration camps and extermination camps only if they made an attempt to escape, or if they didn't work, some kind of violation of the POW camp rules, which is also internationally unacceptable, because every POW has not only the right, but the duty to escape, right? And to rejoin his unit. So this was the situation. As far as the Jewish POWs are concerned, you don't have to worry about any Jewish POW in German hands, from the Red Army or from the Polish Army or something like that. When they took those prisoners, there was the so-called Kommissarbefehl in German, the order of commissars, which meant before they even counted the POWs, Jews and communists one step forward. They stepped out, Jews and Communist Party members. They were machine gunned on the spot, and then there was a counting of the rest. But the Jews, as far as the Western POWs were concerned, the Germans couldn't do that with English, with American, with whatnot, simply because there were more German POWs in England or in American hands, you know, and they would have retaliated. So there they had to go. There was not a single American Jew or not a single English Jew or French Jew or Dutch Jew in the concentration camps, because there was a way of retaliating for that. All what the Germans could do, because they cannot rest in peace, the Nazis, that some Jewish POWs live quietly in a POW camp, that they cannot take. So they could go so far stretching the Geneva Convention that they segregated the Jewish prisoners in the kind of a ghetto barrack, you know. That concerned, you know, the New York Jews, you know, that concerned London Jews, you know. Is it very German? So they couldn't stay with their comrades in arms. But in the East, that was simple. Jews, one step ahead, and machine gun, you know, and then the counting. But anyhow, if the Soviets or other Poles tried to escape, they were not taken back in the POW camp. They ended in a concentration camp in Auschwitz and elsewhere. In this case, with predilection in the hands of Dr. Mengeles Institute. Truth in Science, which was internationally absolutely objectionable. And again, I repeat you, don't let anybody be taken in that the Soviet Union didn't sign the Geneva Convention. Poland signed it. And it was the same.
Excuse me, Miklos, but could you describe a little bit more of the work that was going on at the lab itself?
Well, I mean, as I told you, the lab work was as follows. To try out medicine, and especially, I don't know the English expression, when, I'm so stupid because I'm under emotional stress, you know. What is it when two kids are born and they are born in the same moment?
Identical twins?
Twins. Twins were separated and they were carried out all kinds of experiments on them. Mengele wanted to find out what is the secret of twins being born. And then he wanted to use this, if he would have discovered it, like an insane, mixture of Dr. Strangelove and I don't know what, to give this secret to the German mothers that the master race should only bear twins. That was one of the trips, you know. And then every insane project could find realization, and they prided always themselves that before they have to fight from the coroner for every single dead body, right? For the medical students to study. Here they have living material in unlimited quantity. What a wonderful opportunity for science, to find the truth in science. Indeed, right? I mean, they don't have to fight with coroners over dead bodies. They have an unlimited material of living people with whom they really do what they want. Not even the Society to Prevent Cruelty Against Animals intervenes, right? Like they do about rats or whatnot, monkeys. So, to inject people with all kind of disease, you understand? And to watch them to die. And then came, of course, the orders from the German Navy and from the German Air Force and from the German Army to try out anything on these people, you know. Sub-zero conditions in seawater, sub-zero conditions, I mean, they froze them in, you know, and then they checked the temperature every hour or every 10 minutes whether they are still alive or not in huge blocks of ice, you know.
Miklos, while you were there, what did you personally observe? Which experiments?
I tried not to observe it, honestly, but I had sometimes to clean out these things, you know, I mean, and there were two Soviet officers frozen into a kind of a tank, and to see how fast people die in sub-zero conditions of seawater. It was carefully prepared with 4% salt added to it, you know, like seawater, you know, and it was, you know. My duties were really to clean the floor, to do all kind of almost, I would say, routine work. Tell you one thing, you know. I was 15 years old. I tried to keep away from these things. Well, I came from a different home, you know. Can you imagine that? You would be parachuted into such kind of insane scientific possessed mind like Mengele going around, you know. You try to stay alive and you try to avoid controversy. And I must tell you, the Jewish doctors, you know, who were there, you know, and professors, they also tried to keep me away from it. Of course, I knew about everything what was going on, but the whole horror. I saw sometimes, you know, these women, you know, who were cut, you know, I mean, their bodies, you know, to not to inject, but to see the results, you know, and well, I mean, there was no limit to the horrors there, you know. I mean, there was no limit, you know. I think that you get the picture, right? You know, the insanity of Mengele, his kind of things to find twins, right? The secret of bearing twins for the master is all kind of disease tried out on living human material, and then comes, you know, the orders from the Judenforschungsinstitute in Frankfurt, you know, the Jewish Institute in Frankfurt, to prove the degeneracy of the Jewish race, you know, anthropologically. I will tell you a moment, remind me of the story about that. And then, mainly beyond that, because Mengele's insanity wouldn't have kept this institute going, you know. What was really keeping it going, that the German Air Force and the German Navy gave constantly the orders to try out stratospheric conditions, sub-zero conditions in seawater, right? After the German submarines were going around, the convoys from America with the land and lease supplies were coming in almost frozen waters, right? They could come from Newfoundland, Iceland, right? And then northern England to avoid, you know, the broad Atlantic. Like we make polar flights to make it shorter, right? And then there was another thing which was rarely mentioned by us, how we resupplied Russia through Murmansk, you know. And these convoys had to go from England along the Norwegian coast, and during the summertime there is a complete sunlight, right? Midnight sun, you know, and the Germans had to fly only 5 or 10 minutes, you know, to hit them, and they didn't have fighter escort to get to Murmansk, you know, to resupply the Russians. No thing can describe, you know, the horror of that route, you know, for ships which were hit, and there were plenty of ships hit. Because in those sub-zero Barents Sea, you know, in sub-zero temperature, you don't stay alive more for than 5 minutes. You know, until you get to Murmansk. And then in Murmansk, that's tundra, so then the German Air Force can descend on you again because there is no place to hide.
Miklos, I'm trying to zero in on your personal experience and what you saw.
Well,
how much did you know about what was going on in the lab while you were there at that time, and how did you know it?
everything, everything. I knew it from conversations because I ate together with the doctors who participated, and there was a Hungarian doctor there, you know, I mean, Dr. Miklos, Nisli from Oradea, from Transylvania, and he was, you know, the closest to me, but also, you know, Professor Schulman from the Strasbourg University and from Prague, yes, I knew everything. But when we sat around the table and eat, you know, incomparably better than the prisoner population. Honestly, God, we prefer to talk about Mozart, and we prefer to talk about taking walks on the streets of medieval Prague in our imagination and talking about those things and the Golem legend and whatnot. We tried not to discuss our daily work.
What did the lab itself look like? How large was it? How was it set up?
Oh, it was well set up, you know, and it had its machinery, its chemicals, its desks, its pincers. It was like a lab, you know. It was like a lab. And there was one part of it which was, of course, the most crucial and terrible part of it, the drug and, I would say, all kind of serum, right? But they had to give the prisoners, you know, mercy killings before experiments, or not even killings. That depended on the order, you know? And there I never went in, not a single time. Not even for cleaning it up. That was somehow the sanctuary of the whole thing. I can see it before me on the right side of a corridor. Well, basically it looked like any other lab except for what was going on there. I can see now Mengele's office. His damn gramophone, his damn record player. He liked to listen to Mozart. I tell you, even today he'd eine kleine Nachtmusik and certain things from Mozart, you know, which he combined, you know, his work, you know, with his atrocious experiments on human beings with classical music. He liked the Moonlight Sonata from Beethoven too. No, he didn't find, here you know the point, he didn't find anything incongruent between the two propositions. He considered himself as a great scientist who does for science a valuable work. He has here an opportunity and he does what has to be done. As I told you, he doesn't have to fight with coroners over bodies, you know. He has unlimited living material and he considers himself as a great scientist and he tries to do what he can do. You know, I never found, you know, the slightest pricks of conscience in that man. I never found the slightest doubt of what he was doing as I observed him. There was an SS Scharführer there, you know, in November. One of the, I would say, bureaucratic administrative guard personnel, you know. An older German from the city of Münster from Westphalia, you know. And that was shortly before Himmler stopped the gassing in the end of November 1945, you know, and then they blew up the gas chambers. But they were still leading people. That was, I think, I don't want just to drop in something, I think it was the Lodz ghetto, you know, liquidated. And he just sat there at the table and he said, what is it going on? They told to each other. And with a rather resignation, I could hear it now, he just told to another SS, ja, es geht immer weiter, es geht immer weiter. Yes, it continues, it continues, it continues. I mean, the routine of gassing and cremating, and it gets immer weiter, immer weiter. And he was not sad, but rather, I would say, tired and exasperated by it. Maybe there was a touch of sadness in his voice. I never heard anything like this from Mengele. He was a proper Nazi scientist, you know, belonging to the, how should I say, as he imagined himself, I don't want to quote Quayle, you know, to the Nazi cultural elite, you know. And he was doing his job. Well, I mean, now we know his half a century stay in Brazil. He defended himself, I mean, self-righteously, especially after the apprehension of Eichmann, like a bandit, but with absolute logic and without the slightest remorse. And his family, which had contact with him, you know, he's from Günzburg, you know, in Württemberg, Bavaria, a city there between Munich and Stuttgart, where he comes from. And his family gave an interview to the Spiegel, you know, how they kept in contact with him. It's interesting for me, you know. And you know that they offered him, I don't know how many 100,000 marks, and he gave it, you know, the family gave it to the state of Israel, the money. They didn't keep a penny from it. Well, this is not the things which are done in Germany nowadays. Austria is a different matter, you know. And I read this through in the Spiegel, 4 or 5 continuous articles. I didn't find the slightest remorse in him. Not the slightest remorse. But not in the way as Brunner, you know, this Austrian aide of Eichmann from Linz, who is now helping Hafez al-Assad's intelligence service in Syria, you know. Here is the difference between Germans and Austrians. Brunner, you know, was a classmate and an aide of Eichmann from Linz. And he was interviewed by the Chicago Tribune, 2 years ago in Syria. Mengele considered that he fulfills a scientific job, with an extra opportunity, and he, as I said, he does what has to be done. Distasteful, yes. He does what has to be done. Brunner was boiling with hatred to the Chicago Tribune. Scum! I am only sorry for those which were left alive. They're supposed to die. This is the scum of the earth, the Jews, Not Israel, Jews. Nothing like this with Mengele, but in no way less deadly. I told you the story when the uprising was last year, and when the last Sonderkommando, when they knew that their term is coming, and they prepared well for it, with Molotov cocktails and everything, and we didn't know about it. We just see that the crematory's roof is flying high, the crematory dry, next to us the third crematory. And then shooting starts and the SS come down, and we were sitting at lunch, at 1 o'clock. This was in early October, I don't know, 6th, 7th, maybe 10th of October 1944. And they trample on us and they kick into us, etc. I told you the story, and all the guns over us. And really beat up, not so much me, but the older professors. And then after that it was over, they restored order, let us go. And then the professors got together, the Jewish professors, that next time they will complain to Mengele. It's not the way to do scientific work. It's impossible. Certain norms, of at least civilized conditions have to be secured if he wants, some work to be accomplished. And they really prepared a good speech, well argumented. And then next morning Mengele appears, and they were of course having blue eyes, black eyes, etc. What happened to you? Did you fall down on the stairs during the blackout? Did you hit yourself? And then they gave up the whole beautifully prepared speech because they saw that it is absolutely pointless, As if Mengele wouldn't know what happened to them. What happened to you? Did you fall off the stairs during blackout last night? Did you hit yourself?
Did you ever go into Mengele's office?
Oh,
Were you ever allowed?
oh yeah. Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual. That was the terrible thing about it. Just his desk, his record player, his books. And I tell you, his non-medical books, he had a rather trashy taste as far as books were concerned, all kind of detective and all kind of criminal novels, not particular. I didn't find Schopenhauer there, or Kant, or I didn't find, Heine, or Börne, or Goethe, nothing like that, Although he had some of those too, but he really used. And there were 2 chairs, and of course Hitler's picture on the wall.
Anything else? Any diplomas?
No, not on the wall. No. In Europe, we don't do that. Excuse me. I have 4 diplomas. 1 bachelor's, 2 masters, and a PhD, and all of them from Berkeley, from not a bad institution, they don't give them away. All my colleagues put it on their walls, I never put anything in my wall, and I have it filed away. Just I went through my documents 2 weeks ago, and I have them, but nothing else, I didn't like very much sometimes in Chico the atmosphere, because it was redneck, primitive atmosphere. Don't quote me on that, And I just had a Bismarck saying on my desk because nobody knew German. That was not on the wall. Wir sind nicht in die Welt geboren, um glücklich zu sein, sondern um unsere Pflicht zu tun. We were not born into this world in order to be happy, but to do our duty. And that was all, but I had my diploma.
Any other furnishings there, or?
Yes, there was. Well, let me close my eyes a little bit. Yes, here the fence, the window, the bastard, looking out in a little kind of green spot. Here was his desk. Oh, his family's pictures were on his desk. The Führer was on the wall, big. A chair here. Here was the book case, but not a bookcase, it was a scuff, you know, I mean, with the glass door. Not just, you know, case. It was so long time ago. Yes, he had some lighting, but nothing really fancy. Cigarette butts. Always lots of documents on his desk, but orderly, not in disorder. And then he had, of course, lots of files which were not the library of his work, you know, which I never dared, obviously, to touch. You can imagine if I would have sniffed around or touched anything, that would have been, I mean, a premature retirement from Auschwitz.
Anything at all unusual?
No. 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 Was there a wooden paneling? I cannot even tell you that if I remember the ceiling, and there was a thing that was white. But I couldn't tell you, was it really painted or were there any paintings? Well,
How large a room was it?
I would say it was twice of this size.
So this room is from about 10 by 8, something like that.
Yeah, but it was not this shape, it was deeper. And there was an armchair and there were two chairs, you know, just in disuse if visitors came around, you know.
Any carpeting?
Yes, there was a carpeting, not oriental or nothing valuable, you know, this kind of machine carpeting which you can buy, you know, in German department stores.
The whole floor or just the trim?
Part.
Part?
I know because I cleaned it.
What about the desk? Large?
No, the desk was shabby shape. The armchair, you know, of his was comfortable, but nothing particular, you know. And the desk had, of course, drawers and Fach, what the Germans say, Fach, which means it is a drawer which is not closed, you know, you can put in things. But also drawers which he locked sometimes. And he locked also always his file cabinet.
So in general, the quality of the furniture?
My father owned a furniture factory. Mediocre, you know, mediocre, you know. Our stuff was better, you know, and what can I say? But I never thought about it in that way, you know.
He had a window in his office?
Yeah, a little bit to the side of his desk. So if the desk was here, in a triangle put, you know, and I had a plant behind, yes. And here was the window and looked out, you know, I mean, that was not his office, you know, because his office, I mean, it was only the office of his which he used in this laboratory or experimental station. His SS Sturmbannführer office was, of course, separate, where I never was, because that was the commanding building, you know. And what had I to do in the SS officer building, you
Did
know?
you ever see that office?
No.
The window, what did it look out on?
A garden, I mean, well, I mean, the little green stuff, because this was not the concentration camp average of the barracks, you know, that was the experimental station. I tried to find it when I went back to Auschwitz in 1971, you know, but the Auschwitz camp was so much obliterated, you know, that I had really to zero it in, you know, by the streets, you know, which were no streets, just, you know, the empty spots which things for the barracks, you know, that was it. And then by the map, knowing where my barrack was, etc., and where the crematory ruins were, and this, that, difficulty, you know, find it. And, well, I mean, Jesus Christ, I mean, 25 or 30 years, many things happened there. I found something green there, you know, and I might be that's what the window looked out.
What was the building like that the way it was in?
A dull German military concentration camp architecture, you know. One floor high, That means, you know, English one floor. For us, English would be a second floor, because for you the first floor is always the ground floor. 2 floor high, as different from the barracks, which were always just 1 floor barracks.
Where was the lab on that? Was it both floors or?
No, the lab was certain installations on the first floor, certain installations on the second floor, and there was also a basement. This is what I wanted to tell you. They cleaned out the remnants, not much was left. They cleaned out the remnants of the Polish ghettos by the fall of 1944, you know. And transport came, I don't even know, was it Lodz or there were not too many Polish ghettos left already, you know. And they brought in an old Jew, hunchback, the poor guy, and his son had a hunchback too. It's a special ghettos when they left alive. Some might have been my age. The old man was 40, 50. Both had hunchbacks. And that caught the eye of Mengele immediately, that the son has also a hunchback. So here is a wonderful thing, you know, to prove that the Jews are a degenerate race, right? So he has to send away these skeletons to the Frankfurt Institute. Nice Jewish hunchback skeletons, you know, father and son. As father goes, son goes, right? So, I mean, the rest of the thing was routine. Haneke, one of the SS sergeant, took them down into the basement. That's why I remember, you know, into the cave, you know, basement, shot them, you know, both. And then they put them into these immense barrels which they had, full of salt and disintegrating chemicals, that their skin and their flesh should come off, that they should be able to prepare the skeletons duly for the Jewish Institute in Frankfurt. Well, what can prove better the degeneracy of Jewish race, right? When the father has hunchback and the son has hunchback. Isn't that logic? That's what the whole institute was about, right? You ask me, what did they do? Well, I told you, medical experiment, look for twins, orders, you know, and help for Frankfurt to prove the degeneracy of the Jewish race anthropologically, but mainly Luftwaffe and the Deutsche Kriegsmarine and Wasserkante, you know, the Air Force and the German Navy. Okay, so, and there they were, and then they forgot about them or whatnot in 3 or 4 days. And other prisoners were sometimes brought in from the camp to do some work, you know, around, like removing some heavy construction material or whatnot, you know. And these were prisoners, very hungry, not so well fed as we. And they come in and work there, and they went down to the basement too. And you know, in the Second World War, the Germans kept always beef, mostly beef and pork meat, in big saltwater barrels. That was the way to conserve them, you know? No refrigeration or anything else. So these people went down, you know, I mean, in the basement. I don't know why they can them. At once I hear Sergeant Haneke, Sturmbannführer Haneke, Scharführer Haneke, one of the SS, all the SS, cussing and kicking a Jew there and hitting him, you know. What happened? People went down, the prisoners, you know, into the basement, very hungry, and they found, you know, these 2 hunchback, miserable cripples there in the saltwater barrels. They saw that it is regular flesh, meat, you know, I mean, pork or beef, and began to eat it. Scharführer Haneke, Sergeant Haneke, caught them. And he expressed his disapproval with kicks and butt. Oh, well, I mean, these things were going on and on and on and on and on and on. And the funny thing is that I don't remember a single day when something horrible didn't happen. Horrible for those who didn't live these things through. Not so horrible for those who did, you know?
The people who were experimented on, were they kept in separate barracks? They had separate-
All of us, all of us. Of course, they were privileged, this medical elite which Mengele gathered, you know, from the camp, which was supposed to help him. The thing was that the lowest of them was much better qualified than Mengele was, you understand? And these were professors of the medical faculties, of the best medical faculties of Europe.
The people who experimented
That were assigned, you know, twins automatically came there, you know, I mean, and well, depends on, you know, how they assigned them, you know. That what Mengele did with his aides in the other building, you understand? And then they just came to us, you know. They didn't know that they will be experimented upon until it didn't come down to it.
Where were they housed during the time that the experiments were going on?
There, in this complex where the laboratories were, there were dormitories, etc., and anything. That was the whole complex which I described you. That's where they were housed.
The whole complex?
Yes, here I have something really to say. You see, I saw some pictures and there were some war criminal trials, you know, where these people with terribly deformed limbs, etc., who survived these experiments accused. Honestly, God, well, I cannot tell, I speak only for myself, you know. I didn't see a single person walking from there out alive that he should tell about it, you know, how he was cut. But I must tell you, there were other German extermination camps, Vernichtungslager, KZs, there were also experiments carried out, you know. So maybe they survived there. Because as far as Auschwitz is concerned and our experimental station is concerned, I honestly don't see how they could survive and witness, take photos and stand pictures. But Auschwitz wasn't the only one. That was Mr. Mengele's domain, you know, but there were other ones.
Was there anything else located in that lab building besides the lab and Mengele's office, basement?
Lab, quarters for the doctors, quarters for the guinea pigs, the commanding post, because you were of course on the SS guard, telephone exchange, you know, for the thing, arms, a little armory. It was a little world in itself, you know, in the camp. But Birkenau was so big, you know. Sometimes there were 150,000 people. Of course, jammed into the barracks, but 4 crematories. This is, I told you last time, this is not Auschwitz. This is Auschwitz II. Auschwitz I is, they could even invite the International Red Cross for inspection, you know. But the real thing, Birkenau, the extermination camp, that was across the railroad, right? I told you that. And I would say Birkenau compared with Auschwitz, 1 to 15, 1 to 20 bigger. And that's where the dirty work was going on. So these kind of things, you know, were in the building, you know.
In the one building?
It was how should I describe, in this complex. It was surrounded by a special little fence. And there were buildings which were, I mean, the parts which were 2 floors high, you know. There were which were flat high, you know. And these were the things in it, you know. It had underground installations. Nothing mysterious about it, except that by mistake you could find, you know, 2 crippled Jews, you know, with hunchbacks in the salt water, you know. And that was Mengele's office, but his main office was not there. That was only his office for the time. He came over always, you know. He came always over, you know. And not only him. There were other so-called doctors, you know. It even makes me vomit today when I think back about it, that we had to call these people, and they addressed each other, Herr Doctor. Herr Doctor. So I don't know which Herr Doctor, Dr. Goebbels or Dr. Mengele, I mean, Herr Doctor.
Did Mengele walk around the lab much?
Yes, this was his obsession. He came almost every day. I have to really recollect my memories and look for gaps and to reconstruct, to find, days where he didn't come over. He usually showed up around 11 o'clock. Sometimes he stayed very long in the evening. And then came the Mondschein Sonata, the Moonlight Sonata. Eine kleine Nachtmusik. It mixed according, I will tell you, he didn't tell me that, but I'm not quoting, but I just tell you the general attitude. Okay. I assume that, Miss Emery, you have a nice apartment, right? That's nice. And then you have some cockroaches in the apartment or some bedbugs, right? Obviously, you invite the roadman to exterminate those things and clean up your environment, right? Once the roadman finished his work, will this work, in any way stop you to listen to your Beethoven or Mozart or Haydn? We were something like, which were, an irritating cockroach or tuberculotic bacilli or potato bug, as they called us, in the framework of the Third Reich. But if you take care of such a necessary sanitation, right, that shouldn't stop you listening to the classics. After all, the Kultur. You're a cultural nation, right? Principle is not involved in killing us, except that we have to be killed. Only convenience. Well, if they kill the cockroaches in your garden, would it stop you to switch on your classical station? Well, this is, I think, the key to understand what the Nazis were up to. I think that the Russian pogromщик and the Russian and other East European attitude towards the Jews is horrendous, and their cruelty is simply beyond belief, But at least you have a completely misdirected, but at least, somehow humane hatred. Here you have an attitude of Dr. Strangelove, mixed with 1984, where love and hate, it's beyond hate, it is beyond love, That's how I remember it now. At that time I didn't understand it so clearly. Because I just...
When Mengele was at the lab,
Yeah.
did he walk around?
Oh, yeah, and he talked again in the same principle. He was talking with us in a, I would say, normal, friendly, civilized way. And I must tell you, rarely raising his voice. As you would expect from a civilized scientist, who, at least he thinks, is working on a very important project. That's for Mengele. As far as the guards concerned, there were good ones and there were bad ones among some of the other SS staff there, There were 3 Transylvanians who really helped me whole much, The German minorities were drafted in the SS automatically. So these 3 Transylvanians were drafted into the SS and assigned concentration camp duty without willing it. They were neither Nazis nor did they believe in German victory, and they were Transylvanians, And they were very nice to me. They were not drafted in the Romanian army or in the Hungarian army. They were drafted into the SS. Before, the SS was supposed to be an elite organization. And before, the SS was supposed to be really the Nazis of the Nazis. As the war proceeded, many of them dropped dead, And the SS after 1942, 1943 was a very different SS, especially with the mobilization and the drafting of the ethnic Germans from the Southeast European theater. So those people, they were good or bad. But in my definition, Mengele is way beyond, good and bad, I cannot think about him, in retrospect of half a century, the good and bad. I can think about him only as something, a monster, like one of Schwarzenegger's roles or something like that, exterminator or what. Do you understand what I try to convey, This would be an absolutely mistaken definition if I would call him good or bad or polite or unpolite. Even when he met after that shootout at the crematory number 3, those professors who tried to complain, he knew it exactly that he will get an address, and he knew exactly what they will tell him, But do you see this cold-blooded way how he cut the whole thing short? That's Mengele. What happened to you? You have blue eyes. Oh, I know. During blackout, it is pretty dark. Did you fall down the stairs? And he achieved exactly what he wanted, because he did not want to be shaken out from his Dr. Strangelove attitude by some reality that his close collaborators tell him that under such circumstances you cannot do any serious scientific work, which on other hand he expects. So from his point of view, success was complete, right? Because in that moment those professors immediately saw that there is simply no common currency, no exchange rate, you understand? Words pass, but there is no communication. Mengele didn't want any communication. He wanted the work to be done by these inferior Jewish subhumans who have some expedient technical qualifications before they will be exterminated too, I don't know. Try to set myself back into 1944 and I try to tell you what I think. I don't know. You belong to another generation and to another world. I don't know how much I can convey you. That's what we try to talk about, the experimentalization, the psychology, right? There was just one fear which we tried not to face and which we tried to block out from our minds. We knew, that every 2 or 3 months the Sonderkommandos which operate the gas chamber crematories are exterminated, right? We knew that we have maybe a longer lease on life because we are more than those people who carry over from the gas chambers, into the crematories, the dead bodies when they empty the gas chambers. But we knew that our days are also numbered, We are expendable, we knew that. And we knew from there, that it's only a matter of time, that our time will come. And we had no idea how they decided to recruit again a collective of workers, which was not easy. And how fast are the Allied armies marching forward, So, I just tell you, we knew exactly where it is going, and we knew exactly what our fate will be. It was only a race of time. All those doctors and physicians, were exterminated and gassed in Mauthausen. They caught up with them. They couldn't hide. I could. Because they didn't want witnesses. They stood up during the appel, the roll call, Those who worked with the experimental station in Auschwitz too should step forward. They will get a good job. Those who don't, they will be turned into Muslims, Musulmans. That means, they will send to the gas chambers. those well-known physicians, so well-known that they stepped forward. They were led away, not for a good job, but to the next gas chamber, you know. I was not so well-known. I didn't stand up. Maybe my mother stood by and my mother told me that, listen, son, because I had an idea in my head, you know. Well, they know that you were there. Who the hell knows it after this retreat, right? Who the hell knows it, you know, I mean. If they would have known, then they would have called out by name, right? After all, we were registered. That remained somewhere under a Russian bomb there, you know, between Krakow and Katowice, right? So I simply didn't step forward. And I'm sitting before you here today in San Francisco. Most of them were exterminated. Not in Auschwitz, in Mauthausen.
When did that happen?
A few weeks before liberation. Because the retreat from Auschwitz was absolutely disorderly.
Well,
And it took them several weeks, you know, until they reorganized in Austria. And some bastards came around, you know, Mengele came around. I didn't see him there, you know, man, anymore. I never saw him after Auschwitz. And then it was like, hey, let's look up these people who work there, you know, I mean, we don't need these witnesses. Huh? It was in April, end of March, April 1945.
What was the time
Vienna
period you were
has
talking
fallen
about?
already.
What was the time period that you were describing a few minutes ago
Where? Which?
at the lab?
At the lab, anything I would say between July until the end of November. And after the end of November, in the last 2 months, 44, yes. Well, it had to be, I mean, the picking up, you know, of the doctors, you know. This had to be in April because it was in Mauthausen. And when I was in Mauthausen, Vienna has already fallen.
April of 45.
45. But let's assume anything between June, second half June and November 1944, although I was there until January. But after 1944 November, somehow these human experiments and the whole extermination process and the gassing somehow got down, you know. There were no more gassings after November. And then the crematory was destroyed too. But the laboratory was not destroyed. To that. As a matter of fact, I went from the laboratory to the last leg of my trip, you know, when we had to go on foot to Hindenburg, Racibosz in Polish, to be transported and put into, on the train, you know, to be taken to Austria through occupied Czechoslovakia.
That was January 45.
End of January.
One more question on the lab.
Please,
Were
two.
there well, two more. I do have two more. Sorry.
Good, as many you want.
Were there non-Jewish scientists working there every day? Any non-Jewish scientists?
I don't remember a single one.
So the
There were
only-
non-Jewish guinea pigs, as I told you,
Right.
but not Jewish, non-Jewish scientists. I don't remember, and I didn't hear any.
There were visitors, scientists.
Oh well, I mean SS Medical Service and SS high-ranking doctors, you know, in SS uniform, you know, etc., etc.
How often was there?
Almost, I can say every week. I cannot say that the week passed without it because Mengele was very proud at his work and he was in connection with higher ranking of the cultural elite, you know, who followed, you know, I mean, his endeavors, you know, for the future. What a great thing, you know, every German mother will bear twins, you know, for the master is. There was considerable interest in such kind of thing even in 1944. With the Allies in Rome and in Paris, right? And the Russians on the borders of East Prussia. What can be more important? After all, these people thought, you know, that they are still going to win the war. Yes, in 1944, in 45. Secret weapons. Secret weapons. And that Goebbels, that man was so evil. I just remember a speech, because I remember that they were sitting around the table and that lifted up their whole. Ich besuchte ein Kriegsbetrieb und ich sah dort deutsche Waffen, wo mir mein Herz nicht nur höher schlug, sondern für einen Moment stehen blieb. I visited lately a German war industrial plant, and I saw new German weapons there, which made my heart not only beat stronger, but even it stopped for a moment. I don't need to tell you this, Volksgenossen, I mean German people, that I should justify our cause and our Führer, because we always believed in our cause.
Did you hear this?
Yes, I heard it on the radio. I was cleaning the floor, and I saw the reactions of those Germans, and this was in December 1944.
What were the reactions?
The best possible. Here is the turning point. Some bastard brought up Friedrich the Great, you know, who was almost beaten by the coalition against him. Berlin was occupied by the Russians, the French beat him, the Austrians beat him, you know. And he wanted to go out to ride out before his troops and die heroically in the last attack. That was already decided. And then the news came that Empress Elizabeth, Tsarin Elizabeth of Russia, died. And the Russians withdrew from the war because his strong follower Peter III was pro-Friedrich, you know. And he broke up the coalition. Listen, I saw SS officers to cry with tears when the news came in April that Roosevelt died. They thought that history is going to be repeated. Now the coalition will fall apart. And that is, you know, I mean, that Jewish cripple with the sign of death over his body, as they told that Roosevelt was a Jew. His real name was Rosenfeld, you know. A Jewish cripple dropped dead. Verreckte dieser jüdische Krüppel. And history repeats itself. This is the death of Tsarina Elizabeth, which brings the coalition apart. Well, I don't know. This is, of course, you know, understandably beyond you, because you must understand the Nazi psychology. And today you can really realize the Nazi psychology only in one place, Austria, not in Germany, in Austria. The Germans were doing a good job in re-education. You can see these anti-foreigner riots are only in East Germany. And I'll tell you why. There the youth was brought up, you know, for half a century, 2 generations in these communist lies. They knew that they are lies, so everybody discarded it. And they got some history from their parents at home, who were Nazis, right? There was no re-education, no regret. You don't see such ugly riots in West Germany, right? And then the good old Austrians, they are doing better. I always look at them and I just say myself, these people have forgotten that they lost the war. They have forgotten that they began the war. And they have forgotten that they continued it with the most horrible means whatever the world has seen. And therefore, the Second World War will never end in Austria. Neither the first. They have forgotten that they lost the war. They have forgotten that they began the war, started it. And they have forgotten how they continued it. And that's what we are talking about here, right? With what methods. And this is the reason why it will never end.
When you were in the lab, were there any high-ranking figures?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I heard, you know, well, very high-ranking SS officers, which I don't know the name, you know, but I saw from the brands, from the uniform, from the cars which they drove up with, the Mercedes, I saw it. But I mean, absolutely. But I heard that even Himmler visited the camp, sometimes in not the camp, but the laboratory in 1943. Well, this is the spirit when Himmler told, that the story is a glorious one, but the glorious history will be never written. You understand? It is a glory, but it will be never written, the story of this glory. Because even if they would have won the war, of course, that's the crux of the problem, that they, you understand, so that they will win the war, and they will write history.
Why would they want to hide what they did?
Because they knew very well that although this is a necessary sanitation, mankind for a long time, at least for hundreds of years, has to be re-educated in the Nazi way until they can accept such kind of necessities. Well, I mean, I was, as I told you, very close to these 3 SS from Transylvania, who were not Nazis, and they were Nazis. They maybe saved my life. I corresponded with them for a long time. They went to Argentina, They survived the Bühnenshow, where the Americans let the Germans to stand for weeks and weeks and weeks in a stadium, that they should be identified, if they did something. After the war in the American zone, they called it the stage show, They put them on the stage, and you could select them, if you recognize some bastards. And they did. And, of course, nobody could speak there up, not even SS, not even German, to tell that they are doing things against humanity, that they carry out, horrible things on Jews and on POWs. Volksverhetzung, you are trying to sedition the people, and you will end up yourself in Auschwitz. And the German people was silent. But these simple boys from Sigishora, from Transylvania, Medias, Schas, Schas, couldn't stand it anymore, and they told me later, they told it to SS Scharführer, I told the SS is frankly atheistic, But one of them told, if there is a God, our punishment will be terrible. And then the other older German told, there is a God. There is God. There is a God. He just told our punishment will be terrible for that. And the other just remarked, there is God, don't worry, there is God. Well, I mean, the SS, they were frankly atheistic. I hate those who persecute the Jews and justify horrible things against the Jews, like the Croatians. Oh, they are Catholic, At least the SS were singing songs, I remember. Wir wollen keine Christen sein, weil Christus war ein Judenschwein und seine Mutter, was für Hohn, hieß Marie, geborene Cohen. We don't want to be Christians because Christ was a Jewish swine, and his mother, now what a mockery is that? Her name was Mary, but she was born Cohen. Nice song, Third Reich. The SS was frank about it. So you understand, until you don't make the whole people to believe and to think in such things, you have to hide that.
One more question.
Please.
How much direct discussion did you have with Miklos? Conversation with him, or at least he's talking to you?
I tried to avoid it. And in the meantime, I was always terrified about the man, and I didn't try to avoid it in such a way that it should be obvious and offensive for him. When he came over, I tried always to keep out of sight, when he was not asking for me personally. Jews have an expression for it, what I considered Mengele. Malchamoves, the angel of death, you know? And I don't think that you look very much for personal contacts with the angel of death. A whim of his eye can send me to the gas chambers. Now tell me, what good reason have I to talk to him? That I should be able to tell to the Holocaust program something more? That was the last thing on my mind then.
What conversations did you have?
About my daily work, about my family, about my education, how I learned German so well, you know. About the weather, you know, and mostly about the work.
Did you speak with him every week?
Unfortunately. But again, keep in mind, you know, to try to reduce it to the possible minimum, you know. Try to, my general policy was that when I knew that he's coming and I heard that he's coming, I immediately found some kind of a work, and I seemed to be terribly busy, you know, that, I mean, and I tried to be invisible, you know, that he shouldn't even notice my presence. It was taken for granted that I will work there, you understand? So I didn't have to improve my status, you know, and avoid any kind of conflict with other SSs too, you know, that they should have no reason to discuss even with me, let alone complain on me. Well, come on, put yourself into my situation.
And basically, your job was again to clean up.
Yes, and I tried always to be very busy, that he should feel conscientious about it to distract me from my work. And if he came in, you know, and I didn't have to clean up something, I found something to clean up. Preferably the toilet, because he didn't come in there. It wasn't visible, you know, anything. I always tried to be the inhabitant of a very far away country, you know, when he came in. Listen, I tell you one thing, if you would have ever looked into Mengele's eyes, you would have understood my attitude, because that's what I remember about it the most. How he stands on the Judenrampe, you know, when the transport arrives, you know. Nach rechts bitte, nach links bitte, please to the left, please to the right. And it was, keep always in mind that we are talking about it in a normal atmosphere here, but this was, you know, I mean, anything but a normal atmosphere, you know. So you have to transplant yourself into the atmosphere. I just remember a conversation between Mengele and another officer, you know, somehow doubting already, you know. You know how heroically the Finns fought for their independence, right? You know that Finland is the only country where Hitler didn't even dare to ask for the Jews, let alone to touch them. And every Finnish Jew survived, you know. Not too many, but 4,000 or 5,000, right? Like in Denmark. But Denmark was occupied, Finland was an ally, right? So it's a very different thing. In Germans could do in Denmark whatever they wanted, but in Finland they had to deal with the government, right? And they prefer not to, you know. They didn't see what advantage they could get if they discussed with the Finns the deportation of the Jews. And but they fighting heroically against the Russians who wanted to take over their country. Still, here is a democratic ally of Hitler, right? Tragedy. They are very sympathetic people. And, you know, their leadership, which defended the country like Rabin is defending Israel or Ben-Gurion defended Israel, right? But the Russians told they have to be sentenced as war criminals. The Finns saw at that time not be able to come to the West. They have to fulfill Stalin's orders. And what did Ristoriti, Costicalio, all of them, these great democratic leaders, when they stood before the tribunal as war criminals. Can you imagine? You know, I mean, I'm as much war criminal as I was, you know. What did they say when they got the sentence? 10 years. I served my country and I served Finland when I was prime minister. Now I will serve it in prison. Tragic, right? It had to be. But they knew by 1944 September that they have to leave the Germans, because if not, Finland will be occupied. And that's the last thing what they wanted, that the Red Army should march in there, you know. And then I hear, you know, once, you know, Mengele speaking before the house, you know, and Mengele telling, you know, another German officer, you know, I mean, one has only to will the victory, one has only to will it. It is the triumph of the will. It's only a question of the will. And everything will be all right, because the situation was hopeless. And then this other German officer just quietly asking, do you think, Herr Sturmbannführer, that the Finns didn't have the will and they didn't want the victory? Do you think, Major, that the Finns didn't have a will or didn't have, you know, a desire for victory? Just to show the absurdity of this Nazi fanaticism. But what do you say, you know, when even in April, after Roosevelt's death, Germany is already cut into two, but we are still in Nazi territory, that they begin almost to cry, you know, when they hear that Roosevelt died, because that's the repetition of history, like Tsarina Elizabeth, the coalition is falling apart. But you are not talking to rational people. I know the Nazi psychology, and this is what frightens me so much. It is like the Arab psychology. It is like the Arab psychology. You know, they substitute the irrational with logic, and they substitute their warm kind of swarm of feelings with a sane analysis of the situation. They believe what they want to believe. There is no analysis. There is a kind of a hot swarm of feelings. There is no logic, only the irrational, you know. This is what frightens me. You see, the Arabs rejected every Western current. We are not talking about Arabs, but about Auschwitz, but if every Western current. They rejected Western capitalist democracy, right? As they rejected communism, right? The only European ideology which the Arabs sympathized with ever was the Nazis, you know. And I am not surprised why. Because they en bloc rejected everything what the Western civilization produced otherwise, right? They are not communists. De Gaulle used to say they are too dense and stupid even for that. You know? and they certainly don't believe in our Western democracy and liberalism. But Nazism had deep impact upon them.
When, just before we started taping today, you started to tell us about the jokes that were told.
Jokes.
Were these at the lab that you were?
Well, I mean, that was not with the mirror. In the lab, nobody needed mirrors because we had enough to eat. That was out in the camp.
That was at before
Yes.
or after you were in the lab?
During that I was alive. I went many times
heard,
out, you know.
Heard that from someone else?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I tell you, in many bad situations there are jokes. But if I remember and I look back, it is remarkable how few jokes were in the concentration camps. The situation was too horrible to that. This was not a joke. This was, you know, a thing which happened. And you can imagine that a poor starving Jewish youngster, you know, finds a mirror, you know, that he somehow polishes up and goes up, you know, to a person, you know, and tells, well, here I have a piece of mirror and take a look in yourself, you know, you don't look so bad as you think that you look. But in general, well, I mean, you can reach a certain point that jokes are impossible, you understand? In an oppressive political situation, you know, even under Nazi rule, outside, Nazi occupation, there were plenty of jokes, you know. Not in the concentration camp. If I remember those guards and the whole atmosphere, how we kept those are junkyard dogs. That was their attitude, you know. Tell me, when you are constantly exposed, you know, to junkyard dogs, how much time or energy and mood is left there to create jokes? And the Jews are good in those jokes, but at least you must have certain leeway when you are tightened in. I don't remember really jokes. The jokes can be, you know, under Nazi occupation until you don't get to the concentration camp.
While you were at Auschwitz, where was your mother? Was she in a
Budapest
separate-
hidden with Christian documents. My father too. And they survived.
You said the lab closed down basically in November of 1944.
Yes, November 44.
And then,
And the crematories were also blown up. But the skeleton staff was
By the
there.
Nazis.
Yes, Himmler's orders. That's what it came. And but really, we became depopulated, but there was a skeleton staff still there, and until almost the very end, until the Russians came close. And then I could choose between staying in Auschwitz and wait for the Russians, or to withdraw with the Germans.
The Germans would have allowed you to stay.
Yes, I could have manipulated it. Didn't allow me anything. I had nothing to say, but I could have shifted into the right position, you know. There was already everything disintegrating and falling apart. And still, I was worried that if I stay, in the last moment they will exterminate everybody. Or now is the time, you know, to reckon that I saw too much in the experimental station. So I preferred to go into a crowd which was on foot driven because there was no railroad anymore. We were running and run about 25 or 30 miles in a blinding snowstorm from Auschwitz to the city of Hindenburg in German, Racibosz in Polish, and there we were.
You said that you marched?
Yeah. Yeah, but at least I was in the strength to march because the others were really weakened and they couldn't keep up with the tempo and the cold, and they didn't have any reserves, you know, and they were not even so well dressed, and then they stayed behind, they were shot.
You were able to go from the laboratory compound?
Yeah. No, from Birkenau, from Auschwitz on the road, and then I was in the strength because I was not going through. I was for the 8 months or 7 months before eating, you understand? And I had also some warm clothes.
How were you able to get out of the lab complex into the general?
They marched us in the last 3 or 4 days. They concentrated us in some barracks, you know, I mean, and they told us for transport, you know. And here was the thing, it was clear that we called it the step, you know, that means the first group. The first group will certainly march out. Here was the possibility for manipulation. The second and the third group will be not evacuated because the Russians are approaching too fast, you know. So I manipulated myself in the first wave, you know, to get on the way to march. So it was really my decision. And for the reasons which I told you, I decided to go. It was a tight thing. First the blinding snowstorm, nobody knows where will be the boxcars come, you know, where can we reach. The railroad was already out of service. So, Racibosz, good. But who is to say that we can go from Racibosz? And to march another 20 or 30 miles would have been very difficult for me, let alone to the others. But even so, people collapsed and people just couldn't go on, you know, and we tried, you know, to help them to march, you know, but they just asked us that we should leave them back because we cannot drag them I don't know how many dozens of miles. So we are using up our strengths, and we are certainly not saving them. There was a nice old Jewish cantor from a synagogue in Lvov, you know, was an old man, and we dragged him, and the old man just begged us, don't. You can't drag me, I mean, for dozens of miles, and in the meantime you use up your force, you know, and in the meantime, you know, I mean, we always heard, you know, that he just fell off, you know, and then the whole column stopped, you know, and the SS, you know. Yeah, what the hell is going on? Why did you stop? Huh? What's the matter? Because the others stopped too, you know, because in one the old man fell down in the snow there, you know. Young 73-year-old, 17 years recruit comes up, you know. He was a good kid, he didn't want to shoot him. A kid. Come on, old man. Steh auf! Vorwärts! Marschier! Come on, stand up! Forward! March! I'll never forget this eyes, you know, that old man. He was anyhow a very good, peaceful man. There were lots of arguments, fights, you know, he never participated in it in the barrack, you know. And he just looks with these endless, peaceful eyes on that youngster. And that kid almost cried. He was just a kid, you know. But come on! Don't you hear? But I tell you, steh auf! Ich werde dich erschießen, I'm going to shoot you. He says, good German, hast du auch Angst, mein Sohn? Are you also afraid, my son? Are you also afraid, my son? Hollering, schieße den Saujuden, come on, finish off this goddamn Jewish pig. And the kid, almost trembling with his hand, shoots him. Very much, son. And I cannot forget. Are you also afraid, my son? But with what a peace in his eyes. He was. He knew what he was doing. I can remember again, you know, well, if there is God, our punishment will be terrible for this. There is such thing as a God. When Bartham was elected, a Jewish rabbi from somewhere the east, you know, put up, you know, you think that he's on Harvard campus. Tables distributing literature, you know, and then these Germans, you know, the supporters, you know, the verdrängte, those who were pushed away, that was the return of Waldheim, you know, the Nazis, you know, come back and some old people with this Jägerhut, with this hunter's hats, you know, this is the Nazi uniform, and stand around him, and he looks at that rabbi distributing literature, I just stand to it, you know, next thing. Bisamratten seid ihr, man kann euch nicht ausrotten. You are like the rats, like Jews, one cannot exterminate you. But Americans don't know with whom they are dealing. I translated it to him. And he was rather amused. So, the cockroaches, the insects come out from the woodwork. This is not joke, these are murderers. Every word of what he said was meant. We are rats, and as you cannot exterminate rats, but you can make a good job out of it, right? Try. They just saw this young Jewish rabbi, you know. Juden seid als Bisamratten, man kann euch nicht verrecken. You are like rats, one cannot exterminate you.
So how long did the march go on?
It went on from the early morning, was it the 27th or the 28th of January? Couldn't tell woke up when Auschwitz was taken, I think at end of the month, so that was 2 days before. And then, wait. Sunday. Yeah, we left Thursday, and then we marched through the whole day, from early morning Thursday until late evening. We got to the working railroad in Racibos, Hindenburg at that time still. We did not get boxcars, that would have been too much of a comfort, but we got some platforms, open platforms. Imagine in that blinding snowstorm. I burned myself in the middle. But that's all what I could do. And then we went through the whole protectorate, as they called at that time, you know, Bohemian Moravia, occupied Czechoslovakia. In Psherov, a city, the Czechs were very nice to us. Until they were driven away by the guard. They didn't have too much themselves, but they gave us at least some water and some, not tea, but hot water. It's good. And even some crumbs of bread. But these were the Czechs. Then the Germans managed to drive away.
How long were you on the train?
The whole night. And winter morning, how much it would be? I didn't have my watch. So it was early morning when we arrived to Heimburg, to Austria.
And what happened?
We were in Heimburg in a kind of a temporary camp. That was not an extermination camp, you know, for about 4 or 5 days, and then we were taken to Mauthausen.
How close was that?
By railroad, not on foot, you know, I mean. Mauthausen, 100 miles, 80 miles, yeah, 90 miles. Well, Heimburg is the triangular corner between Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Austria, you know. And Mauthausen is near Linz, Upper Austria. And they took us through Vienna. Tracks, you know, the northern side of Vienna. I grew up practically in Vienna, but of course a different Vienna. That was the Vienna of Freud, of Hugo von Hofmannsthal, Mahler, right? Stefan Zweig. It was a different Vienna. And I love that city. And it's part of me, the culture. But I just felt it, that this Vienna was gone forever, even when it is haunting. But it is haunting like you are haunted by the sudden beauty of Gone with the Wind, you know. It's not existing anymore. But what I saw in Vienna at that time as we went through, the devastating air attacks what Vienna got, you know. Especially near the railroad and marshalling us. I must tell you, when I saw everything in ruins, which was dear to me before, and shattered and burned out skeletons, I was so happy. I just thought about it. Oh God, maybe justice is done. They should know, these bastards, with their power and with the truncheons of their SSM police, that there are greater powers still existing than they are. Today in back, I think, I'm sure that many innocents were killed, you know. This is the peak achievement of the Nazis. That the martyrs rejoice on the death of the innocent, you know. The martyrs, you know, in the boxcar taken into the next extermination camps can rejoice over the death of the innocents, right? I was so satisfied when I saw block after block, mile after mile, that Vienna destroyed, you know. And I recognized in the ruins, you know, but I had to think about it. And I just had one thing, yes, why is it not bombed so much in shambles that I shouldn't be able to recognize it where I am?
How much did you know about what was happening with the war? You mentioned earlier you chose to leave.
Everything. We had a radio in the SS room, you understand, and I had free access to that, you know. I listened, I mean, on that radio. It's a powerful European transmitter on shortwave, BBC, Voice of America. I listened to everything.
Wasn't that dangerous to do?
Well, it was to a certain extent dangerous, but it is a risk what you could take because the SS knew it, you know, and it didn't bother them, you know. I mean, at least my friends knew it, so I knew when they are in duty, you know, I mean.
And they listened to it?
And yes, and they told it to me too. Only they told me one incident which they didn't want to be repeated when I told to the French Jews in August that Paris is free. And they began to hit on that aluminum balls and there was a folk feast there, you know. And then the SS became very angry. Where the hell did they find that out from? I mean, outside, you know, in the camp. And then they thought that should not be repeated, you know. We don't want any kind of July 14th atmosphere and dancing in between the barracks street. Because I told them that Paris is free, and then it spread like I remember that, mon Dieu, oh my God. And at once, you know, they just hit all of that.
These were people outside the laboratory complex?
Yeah. I'm the camp in the huge arches Birkenau where I could go out.
You were allowed out of the...
Oh yeah. I mean, allowed out. I could always, you know, find a pretext to go out. I mean, they didn't bother about it, but I shouldn't spread, you know, BBC news. You know, I shouldn't spread BBC news. But I must tell you that the political prisoners, you know, I mean, and not the political ones, you know, and even those Jews, as I heard, you know, who blew up, you know, the crematory before they were to be liquidated, you know. I use all the Nazi expressions myself, you know. No, Spezialbehandlung, special treatment, that's the word for it. And they knew that the special treatment is coming, you know. And we heard it later from the SS. They died bravely. Churchill, long live Stalin, Roosevelt, you know, I mean, with clenched fists, you know. Well, that was the usual thing between prisoner groups and POWs also, but POWs because they had to be treated differently. When they met, they couldn't speak with each other, you know. Serbian prisoners with French prisoners, Polish prisoners with Dutch prisoners, whatever, you understand? And when they just met the columns, you know, Churchill, Stalin, Roosevelt, de Gaulle, you know, I mean, that was the regular greeting, you know.
In Vienna,
They took it, the Nazis, you know.
in Vienna, did you stop off there at all, or just the train went right through? the
Stopped
city?
and on. This is wartime and the tracks are damaged, you know. We came in, you know, from Hamburg, to the Aspangbahnhof. Well, you know, we went through whole Vienna practically. And we went through a certain thing because apparently the tracks were damaged. So the train with the same wideness was taken over to streetcar rails going through the city. It was war conditions, you know. So I could see the whole thing, you know.
Did they have workers on the train who fixed the tracks as the train went along?
Yes, Austrians and mostly Ost. That was their yellow star, you know, meaning East. Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, whatnot. Ost.
But when you went through Vienna, you already heard about the bombings,
Hmm?
and before you even went through Vienna.
Oh, I knew the bombing started, you know, and I knew the great air attacks, you know, but I mean, that's one thing to hear about the devastation on the radio, and then one thing when you see it yourself, you know. And I had just one feeling, please don't condemn me, I'm not a kind of a sadist, you know. Yes, I see the destruction, but not enough. I was not worried for those things which were collapsing and bombed. I was worried about those things which were still standing. And I was really worried about one thing which I also was informed, that the German Luftschutz, the German air raid and air raid shelter system was very good. So the material destruction was very great, but for my taste there were not enough victims, I would have liked, because I like Vienna as a city, so I imagine just other way around, to send in some kind of nerve gas which kills off, of course, the Austrian Nazis off, and leaves, the Baroque palaces and Gothic cathedrals standing, Well, I mean, that was not possible at that time, but I would have liked, to see much more these bastards drop dead, I mean, I didn't see, the Heldenplatz, the immense square between the city hall and the imperial palace, an immense square, twice so big as the Place de la Concorde in Paris. They call it Heldenplatz, the square of the heroes, where Hitler was received when he entered Vienna. Do you know how many Viennese cheered him? More than 300,000. And I was there as a child, I remember it, And even now, after so many years, when I go through that square and it is now empty, I still hear it. Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! 300,000. A friend of mine, son was in Salamanca studying Austrian, Marcus. And we spoke about Salamanca. The kids visited me right now, The parents are very good to me, I'm very good friends, And the kids are not Nazis at all. Parents, I wouldn't know so much. And we spoke about it, and they are very ashamed of this Heldenplatz business. That's a symbol of everything. Those 300,000 Viennese hollering and whooping and zig-heiling there, And I just told Marcus, he told me, he told me, the kid, that he was in Salamanca. In Salamanca gibt's kein Heldenplatz. In Salamanca there is no such thing as the Square of the Heroes. In Salamanca ist der Hitler nie gewesen. Die Salamantino sind keine Wiener. In Salamanca schreien die Leute nicht. Of course there is no hero square in Salamanca because Hitler never was in Salamanca. And besides the Salamanca people, Salamantinos are not Viennese. There the people don't roar and don't shout, they can't. See, these things don't go away,
Then you were taken to Mauthausen?
Mauthausen. And Mauthausen, after a while, that was in mid-April.
How did you feel when you arrived there? What did you see? How did you feel?
Terrible. Because for the first time I was on general rations of food and I was having no privilege. Bad. Now I found out how people were treated in concentration camps, as if I wouldn't have known. And then was Gusen 2, there was Gusen 1, Gusen 2. Gusen 2, that was not far from Mauthausen, Steinbruch, stone quarry. And then we were taken over to Ebensee, and that was the last camp.
Well, when you arrived, could you describe what the camp looked like when you first
Well, I mean, the Mauthausen camp is up on a mountain top, around with the stone quarries, what it was erected for when Hitler entered Austria. Well, I mean, the transport arrives, the group arrives, about 2,000 or 3,000 of them, us, and, you have to stand up and these SSR running around you, and then when you're inside the camp, the capos, which are the worst people, the Jews who were them, running around you like junkyard dogs, kicking and hitting, and you have to stand there in that endless spring frost until you are counted and counted again, and the number doesn't figure, then they count you again and count you again, and stand there for hours and hours and hours, and you will falter, and if you stand, then you get some good kicks and some good beatings, And then finally, when it is over, after hours and hours, of this kind of counting and recounting, then you are admitted in the barracks, and then you have some kind of relative warmth and sit down. What is it? It's concentration camp, my friend.
Was there
And then you find out, how are things in Mauthausen, how is the food, how is the treatment, how is the work, how is this, how is that, how are the guards, you exchange usually ideas.
there a platform like it?
No, no, no. No, there was gas chamber there, but I mean, there was no selection anymore because we were selected to stay alive, right? Many months ago. Of course, if we are ill, you know, then they might beat us to death or let us to drop dead by ourselves. Hundreds died daily, you know. Or we might be gassed away. But because we are just disturbing things. But there was no systematic, you know, extermination by selection. That was only when you came from the outside in places like Auschwitz, of course, you know, Birkenau, Majdanek, Chelno, Sobibor, Treblinka, only to name you some of these monuments to German culture, you know. There. But you have to come from the outside, from the ghetto. Not Mauthausen. Well, Mauthausen had, of course, an elite part where political prisoners were kept and statesmen like Leon Blum and God knows who, you know? And that was absolutely separate and it was absolutely special and absolutely, I would say, human, you know?
Why were you, the group you were in, why was it spared? Why was it sent?
Many prisoners were spared, many prisoners were machine gunned, you know, even in the last moments. Well, we were still, you know, considered, you know, as a kind of a labor force, you know.
Why weren't you just machine gun?
Because there was no order for that.
Why not? Do you know?
Yes, I do know, because this is not how the system worked. We were considered that they leave us alive until our condition is working condition. And when it's not, then there are the usual 2-3 week selections going through, and those who are becoming Musulmans are sent to exterminate because they are judged by the medical commission. Mengele was doing that, you know, and he cannot work anymore, you know. But this was already March, April 1945, you know, in February. Things were not working so good. So it could happen that some local SS decided, you know, to stop the echelon and kill everybody in the train, you know. And it happened. It happened a few hours before liberation, you know. Mostly you were in such a bad condition and the food was so bad if you didn't have some kind of reserves, which I built up during the time, you know, then you died by yourself. But there was really an erratic policy for our extermination. After all, you know, everywhere people were liberated. I mean, in concentration camps, when the Nazis collapsed, I mean, of course, it's another question in what condition, right? They were there. And because just through this long continuity of hunger, organism was so weakened. Americans tried to do good, you know, and they ordered the local villagers that they should bring us everything, you know, to the camp. And the people ate bacon and ham and fat and whatnot in this completely weakened intestine system, and then they died like flies. And then the Americans began to organize a little bit things when they saw that they will do under medical supervision, you know, and gradually with tea and with bouillons and whatnot, you know. But the population had to supply, and it's the GIs with the best wish, you know, I mean, you know. They thought, you know, that all what we need is to eat, you know. And then they do us really good when they order this goddamn fascists, you know, to bring everything to us under American Sherman tanks, guns, you know, what they had, you know. And they really do something good to us. Well, that was, of course, another chapter of the good, when these skeletons and those which were still breathing, let's put it so, I don't call it life, you know, the skeletons are walking out under these shocked eyes of these well-fed American boys, you know, I mean, who didn't want to believe it, you know. And then we just walk out there, these skeletons, you know, and they just look at us, you know, I mean, they don't know what to say. And then they did the thing what they shouldn't have done. They went down to the Nazi village and told that they should in 24 hours everything what they had to supply to us. Of course, they were afraid. They were much more afraid than they were later because they knew that the evil they did, and they thought that the Americans are coming now, and there is no way, to. The Americans made them an offer, to supply us, and something an offer which they cannot refuse, right? Yeah, but I mean, and then,
When did that happen?
after liberation, in the first days of May,
The first days of May.
May the 2nd.
Getting back to.
It's
from
funny,
your
my
arrival-
Auschwitz number, it is A Auschwitz 12, this is my transport group, but it is exactly the 5th of May 1945. You see, that I was liberated. It turned out to be like that, yeah.
When, could you describe the period in Mauthausen between the time you arrived and liberation?
I was not liberated in Mauthausen.
Okay.
Told that I was transferred to Gusen 2, 2, because there were Gusen 1, Gusen 1, Gusen 2.
Okay, could you
And from there,
describe
Ebensee.
your time at Mauthausen, what that was like?
Well, I mean, there are certain things. Of course, we knew the front situation very well, how everything is collapsing. So we knew that it is only a question of a few weeks. We knew that. But we also knew what goes with it, that in these conditions, the problem was not weeks, that was an infinite period. Every day to survive, was grief. So these weeks had a relative meaning for us, right? And we saw that our guards were absolutely insensitive to logic and to the situation. They acted towards us in no way better, with a complete collapse, with half of Germany already occupied, with Vienna already taken by the Russians, Graz taken by the Russians, right? They didn't act to us in any way better, as they acted, let's assume in 1942, when the Germans were at Stalingrad or whatnot, Rommel was before Cairo, right? They didn't act towards us better. And the feeding and the condition became very bad because there was nothing available anymore. And the problem was, that here is the contradiction. What difference does it make to you when you know that it cannot last more than a month? And you have difficulty to survive the day. And there was the diarrhea, and the this and that, and other thing, and the rotten Jewish kapos, That was the general mood. Hopelessness. Of course, it's shameful to die in the last moment. But there was plenty of opportunity to die. No problem. No short supply. And thus, for me personally, it was a new experience that I tried out for the first time, what real concentration camp life is like. Although I had a great advantage that I didn't ruin my conditions from the end of May, but I had, accumulated something until the end of January, right? So I practically got into a concentration camp in the end of January. And I was evacuated from Auschwitz. So I went in with very different preconditions like the others, Moreover, I was young and I was strong. Therefore I'm here. And I had a special fear after Mauthausen, as I told you. I had a special fear, and a rightful one, with all what I witnessed, that they will discover that I was in the experimental station and they will catch up with me. I don't know what kind of a terror that is, And I was not so sure that some goddamn envious Jew who is just envying that I'm better off than he is will not report me because he get a cigarette or get a piece of bread from it. He has not to go to the SS, he reports it to the capo, and then the capo, reports it, further, and that's it. So, it was a race, with time.
Was there any labor involved at Mauthausen? What?
I
what was
managed to
daily
dodge
work?
it. Of course, the stone quarry, horrible labor, you know, but I managed to dodge that.
How did you do that?
All simple, with the 3 Transylvanian SS's help. Here it is for you. I told you that I'm very glad that Mengele dropped that I don't have to go to testify. You know, because I shouldn't have liked to tell, you know, I mean, that he was nice to me, you know. Good that way. And here it is, the other thing, you know. It is not an exaggeration to tell that those 3 Transylvanian SS greatly contributed, you know. Let's give the first credit to God. Let's give the second credit to my mother's prayers, you know. But the Transylvanian SS greatly contributed to me. For instance, they kept me from that terrible stone quarry work where, you know, you had to push up, you know, the stone carts, you know, on the mountain, you know. And deliberately the SS left you to fall down, you know, bounce down, you know, 600 feet, you know. And the capos did it too. Here is another chapter of the Holocaust studies which I cannot help reflecting upon. We are talking about the conditions always. We are talking about the Germans. We're talking about Mengele. And we deliberately avoid, for obvious reasons, shut off the thing when I tell you this, you know.
Do you want to stop?
For a one good, because I have it in such a way which go into the hundreds of thousands, will be not brought back if we talk about it. But I know that there are forces which would take advantage of it and they would do their best to discredit and harm the survivors, you know. So let's leave certain things unspoken and unsaid because the danger is not completely gone, you know. Can you imagine, wouldn't that be something for Farrakhan? Wouldn't that be something for Arafat? Wouldn't that be something for Dr. Habash? Wouldn't that be a feast for Buchanan, right? And the party of God with Reverend Robertson and Reverend Falwell, wouldn't that be